Have you ever heard the saying about death calling you in the middle of the night?
Death calling you in the middle of the night?
Heard it from other people and stuff, like older heads. And they say that whenever you're like already in bed and shit, like ready to go to sleep, and then you get a text or a call or anything from your friends.
Oh, I know what the fuck you're talking about. Okay.
Trying to say, and they text you, yo, come out, let's go. A random ass message to go outside in the nighttime when you're about to go to sleep, bro. That's death literally calling you.
My mom always tells me never to go out past a certain amount of time. And also, if you don't really want to go out, but like your friends or whoever is telling you, is pressuring you to go out, and you're like, fine, but like you still have that feeling if you don't want to go out. Listen to that gut feeling.
See what I'm saying, bro?
Yeah.
And I mean, that has happened to me multiple times, bro. Like, for example, that time we stayed late, whatever, we did a podcast and shit.
Last week?
No, almost a car accident and stuff. So don't go out. If you guys get that late night text from a sneaky link or some shit, or
a friend,
just stay home or something bad could happen.
What would you do if you found out your sweet little neighbour was actually a serial killer? Dorothea Puente opened up a boarding house in California in the 70s. This catered mostly to clients who were struggling with addiction and mental illness. However, things would only get worse for these residents. One by one, they started passing away, and people started asking questions about what was going on behind the scenes. In the fascinating podcast Killer Psyche, retired FBI agent Candice DeLong explores Dorothea's case and the hidden desires and motives of more cold-blooded killers. It would take years for the gruesome truth to be uncovered about the killer landlady when officers eventually dug up her garden. It was discovered there was at least 7 bodies buried on her land. Everyone was wondering what on earth caused this sweet old lady to start murdering her tenants one by one. Tune in to Killer Psyche to find out. Check out Wondery's Exhibit C library for your true crime fix. From shocking scams to crazy cults to cold case murders, Exhibit C literally has the most nail-biting crime stories documented in such thorough research ways.
This man was killed by his own toy plane. Roger Wallace was a remote-controlled airplane enthusiast. For him, flying model planes was a passion, a hobby that gave him peace. But on a bright summer day in Texas, this cherished pastime turned into a horrifying nightmare. On this fateful day, Roger was demonstrating one of his newest planes. It was a high-performance model with a 2-foot wingspan, sleek and powerful. The crowd watched in awe as the plane soared and looped through the air with precision. But in an instant, the beauty of the moment dissolved into chaos. The aircraft veered off course, descending erratically. Roger tried to regain control, but the plane's trajectory was no longer in his hands. As it barreled towards the ground, no one expected what would happen next. The plane struck Roger directly in the chest, its high-speed propellers slicing through flesh and bone. The force of the impact was catastrophic, puncturing his heart and lungs. He collapsed instantly, gasping for air as blood pooled all around him. Despite desperate efforts by bystanders and paramedics, Roger's injuries were way too severe. He was sadly pronounced dead at the scene. The man who spent years mastering the skies was brought down by the very hobby he loved.
The Latin American version of the boogeyman. I feel like a lot of us Mexicans and Latin people remember a lot growing up we were scared of. I know some places they say it differently. They say el cuco or el coco, but for the majority of it, the description of it remains the same. It's a hairy-like creature who has glowing red eyes and has bat-like ears and razor-sharp teeth like a barracuda fish.
What the fuck?
Some other people say he's like a ghost figure or a shape-shifting creature, and it preys on misbehaving children and children that stay up late at night. And he's known to hide under beds or in closets, just waiting for his opportunity to basically take you away and eat you. And I know a lot of us, I know me personally, I was scared of whenever she would mention the name, and she never even told me how it looked. It's just the fact that, yo, her saying el cuco va a venir y te va a comer, that traumatized me, bro. And also, there's a show that told the story of el coco. It's called Lo que la gente cuenta.
Yo!
You used to watch it?
Yes.
So I'm gonna show you a clip of it. I was seeing in the comments, people were saying how like that specific episode it
Was
traumatized
scary.
him. Yeah, it's a little boy, his mom, and a grandma. He tried to tell his mom, his grandma that he's seen the boogeyman,
they don't
but like,
believe
they
him.
don't believe him.
No, I think I've seen this episode. I don't fucking remember what.
This woman was killed by an umbrella at the beach. Lodi Michelle Beck's tragic death occurred on a bright June day in 2016, as she celebrated her 55th birthday and wedding anniversary with loved ones at Virginia Beach. While the atmosphere was festive, an ominous change in the weather brought strong, unpredictable gusts of wind sweeping across the shore. One of these powerful gusts tore a beach umbrella from its anchoring in the sand. The umbrella, with its pointed end exposed, became an airborne weapon, flying uncontrollably across the crowded beach. Tragically, its flight ended when it struck Lodi with a devastating force. The umbrella's metal tip impaled her directly in the chest, causing catastrophic injuries. Witnesses described the scene as surreal and horrifying. Lodi collapsed to the ground as beachgoers rushed to her aid. Many were too shocked to act, frozen by the unexpected violence of the incident. Emergency personnel were called immediately, and first responders worked tirelessly to save her. But despite their best efforts, the trauma was too severe, and Lodi was pronounced dead at the hospital. A beach umbrella, a benign and common sight on any summer day, transformed into an instrument of death. This remains a chilling reminder of the unpredictable and sometimes violent force of nature.
This photo helped solve one of the most disturbing crimes Kent has ever seen. This is the chilling case of the British hospital worker who murdered 2 and abused over 100 corpses. It was 1987. David Fuller worked as an electrician at the Tunbridge Wells Hospital in Pembury, which is just a short drive from London. To his colleagues and the patients at the hospital, he seemed like a normal guy. They had no ideas of the horrors that were going on behind closed doors. Wendy Nell and Caroline Pierce were 2 local women in their 20s. Although they didn't know each other, their lives drew parallels. They were both hard workers with many friends, and they both were living in bedsits in the area. Wendy had recently become single after her marriage broke down. This was incredibly heartbreaking for her, as she really wanted to settle down and have children. She started dating again, but on the night of the 22nd of June, her boyfriend dropped her off at home and would never see her alive again. She was found the next day, nude and covered in blood. She'd been SA'd and strangled to death. Shortly after this tragedy, Caroline went home after her shift at a restaurant. Neighbours heard screams coming from her home, and then she vanished. 3 weeks later, her body was found by a horrified tractor driver. She was again nude and had been dumped in a drainage ditch. Now, these 2 murders were remarkably similar, and the media dubbed them the bedsit murders. Frustratingly, due to lack of technology and a lack of eyewitnesses, these cases quickly went cold. Investigators did collect fingerprints and DNA from both crime scenes. However, there were no matches on the DNA database when they checked them. It wasn't until years later, when technology had advanced, that they did get a breakthrough. They were able to identify David as a likely suspect through something called familial DNA, which is basically when they look at your family DNA. Police found that David had a history of burglaries in the 70s. By 2020, he was married to his 3rd wife and had a teenage son. Officers were just about ready to make a move and question David. Upon questioning, he denied any knowledge of the girls, and he also denied ever being in those local areas. But police proved this to be a lie. He had hundreds of diary entries that proved he had been, even to the restaurant where one of the girls worked. One photo they found in this house was absolutely vital. It showed him lying on his front with trainers with a very significant print on the bottom. Police managed to match the soles of the shoes with the bloody footprint found at the scene. Now, they were overjoyed that they'd seemingly found this double killer. However, they were about to find something really disturbing that no one expected. David had hoarded multiple computers and hard drives, and a couple of hard drives were actually fastened to the back of one of the set of drawers that he owned. There was a reason that these were concealed. They were videos of David inside the hospital mortuary. In these videos, he was filming himself SAing deceased patients. These were people ranging from all ages up to over 85. He also had hundreds of child SA images on his computers. For more than 3 decades, David had got away with these abhorrent crimes. He was given a lifetime prison sentence and will thankfully never be free again.
So this is the end of TikTok, and I want to say goodbye. Just because this app is going to be gone, that doesn't mean that the United States government is going to stop using children in pedophile rings. It doesn't mean that the US government is going to stop trafficking drugs, and it doesn't mean that corruption is going to end. In fact, what's about to happen, what we're about to see, is corruption absolutely exponentially increase in every sector of American life. For years now, I have taken you guys on a journey with me, exploring true crimes that happen across the planet and exposing mainly pedophile rings and sex crimes against children that happen here in America and in every country on earth every single day. And I've already been banned from other social media platforms for sharing these stories, for talking about these things. TikTok was really the only place I found where this information was able to get out to people as fast as it could. And yeah, it's really disappointing and it's really sad. Now, a lot of you guys have tuned in every single day to hear a new true crime story. A lot of you guys have been with me through ups and downs in life, through getting sober, through getting married to my wife. You've seen the evolution of everything that brought me here today. And I just want to thank all of you guys from the bottom of my heart for everything that you've done for me, for my wife, Courtney. Our show Murder in America wouldn't have been possible without you amazing people on TikTok. My new show, The Conspiracy Files, would not have been possible without you guys on TikTok. And I just want to reiterate, please, if you valued what I've added into your life, if you've enjoyed learning about these stories and learning about these things, I am going to be on YouTube at The Paranormal Files for my ghost hunting stuff, where we have over 1 million subscribers, and The Conspiracy Files, which has been my new passion for the last 7 months, exposing international pedophile rings, deaths that were covered up, and other government secrets. Because this is a problem. I'm actually here in Washington, D.C. right now, finishing production on my first feature-length documentary, in which we are exposing a nationwide pedophile ring that existed in America in the 1980s and early 1990s that involved the ritual abuse of children, murder, sacrifices, politicians. It went all the way up to the White House. And we've been interviewing this whole last week undercover informants, people that were intimately involved in this story, victims, and it's realer than you can possibly imagine. And losing this platform right now, when all of these things are starting to come to light, is really disturbing and really disheartening, because I've found it so easy to share information with you guys through this app. But please, if you've cared about what I've done here, we've built a community of over 3.3 million followers on TikTok. That's a bigger number than I ever thought I would have following me. Consider following on YouTube at The Paranormal Files or The Conspiracy Files. I also have other accounts under the handle The Paranormal Files on just about every social media that I haven't been banned from. But yeah, this stuff isn't going to end until we do something about it. This has been my form of doing something about it in case this app goes away tonight. And I just want you all to remember, the world is not how they want you to think that it is. The world is not innocent. The world is not generally kind and forgiving. There are very dark elements to our existence here on Earth that the government, that the powers that be, the billionaires, the people on top don't want you to even know about in the first place. So I'm going to continue my educational journey, informing people on YouTube and my other social media accounts. But in case this gets deleted, thank you guys for everything. I just want to say, it's really been a pleasure. I've experienced the highest highs, the lowest lows through TikTok. I've fought against censorship constantly. And building a page with 3.3 million followers, like I said, I was born in South Dakota, and I never had an entertainment industry connection in my family or anything. Of course, there's a fucking plane, military plane right above me right now. But I never thought that this would be possible. This was just something that was always so far out of the realm of possibility that I didn't know I could do this. So thank you guys for everything. Hopefully I will see you all tomorrow if this ban doesn't get implemented overnight. But if not, you can find me everywhere else. And please do stay safe out there. None of what I've said on this channel, on my page, has been a joke. Everything I've talked about here has been real. So yeah, it should be a warning if you go through and look at all the content that I've produced, that children in today's society are in more danger than they ever have been. And yeah, I guess this is my goodbye. I love you guys, and thanks for being here along the way.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
This man dipped his own head into a deep fryer, and this is a massive trigger warning. Okay, so at first glance, this looks like a normal chef just cooking in a kitchen. But what happens shortly after this is absolutely nightmare-inducing. This chef tosses his own head into the deep fryer, completely deep frying his entire head with oil, and dying. And the most messed up part about this is that there is a video of this. Apparently the man was possessed by some sort of ghost or demon, but I don't know how true that is. But the most believable reasoning for this is that he had some sort of mental illness, which was even noticed by some of his co-workers. But in the video, the man rotates his head extremely weirdly and inhumane, and then just throws his head into the deep fryer with no hesitation at all, leading people to believe that he was possessed, because why else would any sane person just throw their head into a deep fryer with oil? I don't recommend anybody watching or searching for the video because it is honestly pretty disturbing. Mainly because it just comes out of nowhere and you're not expecting it at all. 1 minute the chef is just cooking food doing his job, and the next he starts twisting his head all weirdly and throws his head into the deep frying oil. I will never watch this video again, and you should never.
Recently, the Zodiac Killer might have finally been revealed.
Was it because of that video of somebody saying, I think my grandpa
Yes,
was the Zodiac Killer?
That video popped up on my For You page, but I scrolled past it because I thought it was like somebody just chatting shit, like they're just fucking bullshitting. But everything that he said
Is accurate?
real. Every evidence that he pointed out, all the pictures that he showed, it checks out a lot.
Oh, fucking.
Bro, it's crazy. He says that his name is Richard Hoffman, and Richard Hoffman was one of like many of the suspects that was questioned about at the time whenever they were trying to figure out who the fuck was the Zodiac Killer. His grandpa was a Vallejo police officer, which was the same area that the Zodiac Killer killed. He even shows a bunch of sketches of like the Zodiac Killer and looks just like his grandpa.
Bro.
Those are his pictures.
Yo.
Family pictures. Jay, he brought up a poem that his grandfather wrote. In the poem, he spells until with 2 L's. In the cryptic letters, the Zodiac Killer was known for spelling until with 2 L's at the end. And like that's mad specific that he would do the same thing.
Yo.
And another thing, one of the victims, her name was Darlene Farron, and on the night that she died, that she was shot, her and her boyfriend were being followed by an unmarked vehicle.
Plates, no
Exactly.
registration.
Exactly. And Hoffman was driving an unmarked police vehicle. And whenever she was shot, 5 minutes later,
The man that you saw in that video was dumped overboard while attached to an anchor. Yes, he was murdered. The 68-year-old man's name was Reynaldo Fuentes, but his nickname was Taliban. Now, Reynaldo was an infamous drug smuggler, and as it turned out, Reynaldo had stolen $10 million from the cartel that he worked for. You see, Reynaldo had a plan to dump over $10 million worth of cocaine into the ocean, tell the cartel that he had lost it because authorities had tried to board his boat, and then he wanted to go circle back and pick it all up. So Reynaldo did just that. He dumped the drugs overboard, he went back later to retrieve them, and he actually managed to get it back to a different Caribbean island. But eventually one of his henchmen ratted on him and the cartel found out. That's what led to this video. On that day, members of the cartel invited Reynaldo to a meeting. They then beat and abducted him, tied him up, and took him out to the middle of the open sea. And that's when, in revenge for stealing all of their money and drugs, they strapped an anchor to Reynaldo's body, and yes, in the extended clip, they throw him overboard. That truly, to me, has to be one of the most horrific ways to die, not only drowning, but being pulled into the darkness of the deep ocean, not knowing, obviously knowing no one's ever going to find you. If you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife, Courtney. It's available to listen to for free on all platforms like Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
This woman murdered her husband to get more YouTube subscribers. On the 20th of February 2015, police got a panicked call from a woman in Texas. A lady named Samantha Walford had called her mum Rosie asking for help. She told her there'd been a kidnapping. What had actually happened was far more shocking than anyone could have imagined. Samantha had met her partner Ernie at a tattoo parlour, and the pair soon began dating. Samantha was already a mother of 2 from a previous relationship. Now, Ernie took on the father figure role for her twins really, really well. 3 years later, the pair actually had another set of twins. Later down the line, they had another child, so they really had their hands full. Ernie was working loads to provide for the family, and Samantha was trying to make it on YouTube. Her attempt at a YouTube career was actually really putting a strain on her relationship. The pair began arguing loads about her obsession with it and just how it wasn't actually doing very well for the amount of time she was spending on it. She was actually really neglecting her children in order to try and make her channel grow. On the 20th of February 2015, police were called to her home. Samantha claimed that 3 men had broken in and kidnapped her husband Ernie. However, inconsistencies started appearing from the get-go. During an interrogation, she admitted to calling her mum but didn't call 911 because she was tied up. Police asked, "How did you dial your mother, with your face?" She eventually admitted to knowing the kidnappers but still denied having anything to do with it. They were Jose Ponce, Jonathan Sandford, and Octavius Rhymes. Investigators seized phones and ended up uncovering texts between Samantha and the men, and the texts were shocking. They proved that Samantha had orchestrated the whole thing. Now, really similar to the Jennifer Pan case that I recently covered, Samantha had left the front door open intentionally to allow the men to access the house. They kidnapped Ernie and took him to the woods out of earshot, where they callously shot and killed him. Police concluded that Samantha was the mastermind and concocted the plan to get fame and attention. 2 of the men got 50-year sentences, 1 got 93 years, and Samantha got 99 years.
These are pictures that capture people's final moments, and this one is extremely sad and unfortunate. This picture captures the last moments of Ayana Takamasu, the girl wearing the red sweater in the background. She slipped and fell into Niagara Falls shortly after this photo was taken. In 2011, authorities recovered the body of a woman from Niagara River. She was later identified as Ayano Takamasu, a 20-year-old international student from Japan. While visiting Niagara Falls with a friend, Takamasu climbed over a railing to pose for a picture. She was straddling the railing to look at the falls, and when she stood up, she lost her footing and fell into the river 24 meters upstream from the brink of the falls. Moments before the tragic accident occurred, an Ontario-based couple was also taking pictures of themselves, and they captured what is thought to be the final moments of Takamasu. In the photo, she can be seen in the background right here. She is wearing a red sweater and appears to be standing on the top of the rock barrier. The incident was also captured on CCTV surveillance, and no foul play was involved. This is just so sad because she probably went to Niagara Falls to enjoy a breathtaking view and something she never experienced before. But instead, the unthinkable happened in seconds and she lost her life. This is just so sad and heartbreaking, and it makes you realize that you should never take life for granted because it could be taken from you in a second.
One of the darkest European bands, specifically a black metal band, Mayhem.
I've never heard of them.
In 1988, they ended up receiving like a package from a guy. His name was Pele, but he went by the name of Dead, and he was part of another band called Morbid, and he sent them a package of his album with Morbid, a letter saying how much he wants to join and why he feels like he would be a good addition to their band. A weird thing that he sent as well was a dead rat. So they're already...
Wait, hold up. They didn't mention anything about the rat? Like, yo, this is fucking weird.
Well, they did. They were just like, let's give it a shot. They needed a lead singer anyways. He's one of the reasons why Mayhem was like so popular and they started getting traction. And the band members would like specifically say that he was doing a lot of crazy stuff on stage. He would like himself while performing. He would like do a lot of edgy stuff. He would sleep with dead birds underneath his bed because he wanted to smell death and be as close to it as possible. He would also always talk about how depressed he was, how he wanted to eventually... And there was one band member, Euronymous, they would always bump heads and he would actually nag him to... One day on April 8th, 1991, Hellhammer and Euronymous, they end up going to the store. Euronymous comes back first and he sees Dead on the floor, dead. Instead of Euronymous being like, yo, what the fuck, what's going on? He goes to the store, he picks up a disposable camera.
No.
And he starts taking pictures of everything. He calls Hellhammer and he's like,
I think I know where the fuck this is going, bro.
Dad just did something mad cool. And he's like, what do you mean he just did something cool? Some time passes later, right?
Stop scrolling, you need to hear this. This is Bruce Manley, a former high-ranking military official who was just shot and killed by Seattle police. Now, you might be wondering, why was Bruce shot and killed? Well, as it turns out, Bruce was allegedly a pedophile. I'm already smelling a massive cover-up. So Bruce was a very, very high-ranking official, and he held a lot of power in his position with the US military. Bruce was a father, a highly decorated man, and before what happened last week, he seemed like an average guy. But last week in Seattle, police set up an undercover sting to catch child predators. And to catch predators for this sting, Seattle police posted an ad online pretending to be a mother who was offering up her 7-year-old and 11-year-old children to be used by a man. Now, this is incredibly disturbing, and apparently multiple people responded to this ad. One of them being an extremely high-ranking U.S. military official, Bruce. So on that day last week, they were waiting for predators to show up at the Sting hotel room. But when Bruce showed up, the police opened the door, exited, began identifying themselves, but saw that Bruce was retrieving a weapon. A confrontation ensued, which got physical, and the Seattle police basically unloaded on him. If you watch the body camera footage, which is publicly viewable online, just be warned, it's really disturbing. At first, people were shocked because Seattle PD hadn't killed somebody in over a year. But it was when Bruce's identity was revealed that this story took an even more disturbing twist. This was a guy who held a massive position of power. We know that the government is complicit in a ton of different cover-ups. And according to other people that have done research on this subject already, just in the past hours and days, Bruce left behind a trail of criminal activities, allegedly. But it's funny because nobody's talking about this. If I hadn't seen somebody talking about this on TikTok, it probably would have been a local news story that the government, the news agencies could have buried. But we're not going to let that happen. That's not what we do around here. Not only was this guy trying to do something extremely disturbing to a 7 and 11-year-old child, but he allegedly had already done it. I'm going to keep you guys updated on the story as it unfolds. I'm going to stay right on the nose of this thing. And yeah, I'm expecting some very disturbing developments to keep coming out. And if you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife Courtney. It's available on all streaming platforms.
Police were recently called to a home in West Virginia where they found this little girl deceased in a skeletal state on her bathroom floor. Her mom has now been arrested in connection with her death. This is 14-year-old Kennedy Miller. On the morning of April 17th, the Boone County Sheriff's Department were called to her Morrisville home for a death call. She lived in the home with her mom and grandparents. When they arrived, they found Kennedy on the bathroom floor in an emaciated skeletal state. Someone in the home reportedly called 911 after she suffered cardiac arrest, and police are describing the scene as shocking and incredibly disturbing. According to the criminal complaint, prior to her death, Kennedy had only stepped outside twice in the past 4 years, and she hadn't been to school since 2019. Kennedy reportedly suffered from an eating disorder for several years and hadn't been eating for months, according to a family member. Due to her physical state, authorities believe that she hadn't been able to function on her own for at least 4 or 5 days before her death. Police state that Kennedy's eating disorder had never been diagnosed or medically documented. Investigators believe that her mom, 49-year-old Julie Stone Miller, failed to get Kennedy medical attention for at least 4 years based on the overwhelming visible condition of her body and the clear and distinct physical problems that she endured. They fully believe that this neglect is what ultimately caused Kennedy's death. Her death and declining health went unchecked for so long, authorities believe, partly because she hadn't attended school since 2019, and neighbors hadn't even seen Kennedy since 2019. At that time, they say that she seemed okay, but they were unaware of the severity of the situation. They did add that they had seen state police making possible wellness checks over the years, but they never suspected any abuse or neglect in the house because they knew Kennedy's grandparents, who are reportedly well respected in the community. But because of the gruesome nature of her death and the state of her body, police are now investigating her death. Julie's cousin reportedly said that for years she asked about Kennedy and where she was, and when they never got a response, CPS and law enforcement were called in to check on her. But sadly, whatever was happening behind closed doors went unnoticed all those years. Julie has since been arrested in connection to her daughter's death and has been charged with felony child neglect resulting in death. She faces between 3 and 15 years in prison and a possible fine of up to $5,000 if convicted of the charges. She is currently being held at Southwestern Regional Jail on a $250,000 bond, and her next court date is set for April 29th. Kennedy's autopsy report is still pending while the investigation is ongoing, and in the meantime, police are interviewing neighbors and possible witnesses to figure out what was truly happening behind those doors the last 4 years.
This is by far one of the worst ways somebody has ever died, and whatever you do, don't look up the picture. This is Hisashi Ouchi, and he became the most radioactive man in history after a lab accident. On September 30th, 1999, the 34-year-old Hisashi and 2 other co-workers were working at the Takamura nuclear plant in Takamura, Japan, and they were put on an extremely tight deadline by their superiors. The plant converted uranium hexafluoride into enriched uranium for the purposes of nuclear energy. This usually involved a carefully timed multi-step process, but Hisashi and his co-workers attempted to take a shortcut to meet their deadlines. But sadly, this turned into a horrific explosion of uranium solution that turned into a nightmare for Hisashi. The plant underwent emergency evacuation, and the 3 men were immediately rushed to help. They all had been directly exposed to harmful radiation, but to different degrees. The sole survivor of the group was exposed to 3 sieverts of radiation. The second one was exposed to 10 sieverts of radiation, and Hisachi was exposed to a whopping 17 sieverts of radiation, which was way more than any other human in history. And by the time Hisachi arrived at the hospital, his body was already covered in burns, and his eyes were leaking blood, but his agony had just begun. 3 days after the accident, Hisachi was transferred to the University of Tokyo Hospital. Hisachi's lack of white blood cells and his non-existent immune response prompted experts to try a number of procedures to save him. Doctors tried countless skin grafts and blood transfusions, and even stem cell transplants. But sadly, none of these seemed to work. Hisachi soon cried out, "I can't take it anymore, I'm not a guinea pig," just after 1 week of treatment. But although Hisachi begged for his death, his family insisted that doctors kept him alive to keep trying experimental treatments. Hisachi's skin began to melt off of his body, and even after this, his relatives ordered his doctors to do whatever it took to keep him alive. All in all, Hisachi was kept alive against his will for a disturbing 83 days. And at one point, he suffered 3 heart attacks in just 1 hour. And following the guidelines from his family, the doctors resurrected him again and again and again. Every time he died, he came back and suffered extreme brain damage. And on December 21st, 1999, Hisachi finally died of his last heart attack after multi-organ failure, and it was only then that his torture stopped. You really can't fathom the amount of pain this man was in until you see the photo of him. He doesn't even look human and kinda looks like an insect. The radiation poisoning is that bad. I don't recommend looking the photo up, but if you do, while you're looking at it, keep in mind he was kept alive for 83 days in this state. Could you honestly imagine what was going through his head and what his body was feeling? This is something straight out of a nightmare, and may Hisachi Ouchi rest in peace.
Hammer coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
This stunning teenage dancer was murdered by the last person anyone would ever expect. It all started with a fake psychological study. Rachel Barber was a beautiful 15-year-old girl from Melbourne. She had stunning green eyes, and everyone always commented about how clear and gorgeous her skin was. She was a full-time student at the dance factory and had dreams of making it big, but unfortunately her life would be cut short in the most cruel way. Caroline Robertson was 19 years old and started babysitting for Rachel in the 90s. She became quite obsessed with Rachel and even would go as far as to write about her in her journal, talking about how beautiful she was, how clear her skin was, and how much more attractive she was than her. Her obsession with Rachel would take a sickeningly dark turn. It was the 28th of February 1999 when Caroline made an odd proposal to Rachel. She told her she would pay her $100 in order for her to take part in a psychological study. She did warn Rachel, however, not to tell anybody about this, as it may invalidate the results. Now, Rachel obviously took her up on this offer, as that's a hell of a lot of money for a 15-year-old. The pair met after class on the 1st of March and went to get pizza together first. Caroline then took her back to her place and prepared Rachel for the study. She instructed Rachel to sit and meditate. As Rachel closed her eyes, Caroline came up behind her with a telephone cord and strangled her to death with it. She then took her lifeless body and bundled it into her wardrobe. Over the next few days, Caroline would wrap her victim in a rug and also contact a local taxi man to help her to move a statue from her house. She then buried Rachel in a pet cemetery nearby and thought she'd got away with this. She chillingly had applied for a birth certificate in Rachel's name. She'd obviously become so obsessed with Rachel that she actually wanted to take on her identity. During this time, Rachel's family was obviously worried sick. They'd reported her missing and were looking everywhere for the schoolgirl who had seemingly vanished into thin air. But people around Caroline noticed that she was acting odd. She'd gone home on the 2nd of March, feeling unwell, which was unusual for her. She'd also been spotted by witnesses walking with Rachel before Rachel disappeared. Rachel's phone log, police would later find, showed the pair were in contact just before she vanished. That's when detectives had a shock. They went round to Caroline's to question her about the teen, and they found Caroline passed out on the floor. Now, she'd actually had a seizure, and some believe that this was because she was so stressed after obviously having murdered this teenager. They were also stunned to find Caroline's journal, which documented her murderous plans. She'd written down things such as thoroughly clean house and steam clean carpet. She was forced to confess once she'd regained consciousness and was eventually sentenced to 20 years in prison. She was diagnosed with personality disorder and spent just 15 years behind bars before being released in 2015.
What's a missing persons case that still keeps you up at night? I always think about the disappearance of Nicholas Downey and how he completely disappeared after his rental car was found abandoned. So this is 37-year-old Nicholas Downey, and he was last seen on February 27th, 2023 in Bristol, Florida. At the time, he was working in Bradenton, but he'd taken a week off to go and visit his wife Holly, who was staying at a rehabilitation center in Mississippi. For the trip, Nicholas rented a Tesla through the Turo app. He was on his way back home when, on February 26th, he pulled off of Interstate 10 to recharge the Tesla behind a McDonald's in Marianna, Florida. Security footage shows that someone exited the vehicle to charge it, but the footage was too blurry to know if it was actually Nicholas getting out of the car. The person then gets back into the car before pulling on a State Road 71 heading south instead of getting back on the interstate. While this was happening, the car's owner was watching its progress on the Turo app and saw the direction it was heading. This worried the owner because the car wasn't heading back to Tampa as planned, and he already had the car scheduled to be rented out by another customer the following day. So he sent Nicholas a text message to make sure that he was okay, which would have showed up on the car's dashboard, but he never got a response back. Nicholas was scheduled to go back to work the morning of February 27th, but he never showed up. Instead, that morning, the Tesla he was renting was found abandoned in Liberty County, parked between Turkey Creek and Prison Road. This area is, I guess, known as the Stoke site. But Nicholas was nowhere to be found. The car only had a little bit of charge left and the windshield was damaged. Authorities found that the car at some point had driven under a cable, and this was confirmed when they found the cable in question about a mile and a half away with the car's white paint on it. The police contacted the vehicle's owner, who was then able to remotely unlock it. And inside the car, police found 2 phones, one belonging to Nicholas and one belonging to his wife, who wasn't allowed to have a personal phone at the rehab center. Also inside the car was a change of clothes, a McDonald's receipt, a drone that Nicholas used for work, and an unknown substance. Authorities searched the area surrounding the car by land and air, and they even brought in tracking dogs, but no trace of Nicholas has ever been found. According to a sheriff that was on the scene, he said that there were hardly any footprints surrounding the car, and that something isn't adding up. His family didn't even know about his disappearance until a few days later on March 3rd when his wife was allowed to call him, but a deputy answered instead. The car rental was without contact and done through the Turo app, so the owner of the car never actually met Nicholas. And according to Nicholas's mom, she last spoke to him around 8:30 the night he went missing, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. She mentioned that Nicholas did struggle with alcohol and drugs in the past, but he's never just not reached out. They talk almost every day, so it's not like him to just disappear. It's now been a year and Nicholas is still missing. If you have any information about his disappearance at all, please contact the number on the screen.
This Texas woman decapitated and cannibalized her own baby. This is an incredibly disturbing story, so listener discretion is advised. This is Audie Sanchez, and in July of 2009, she called the police. What she told the dispatchers was disturbing. She claimed that she had just murdered her 3.5-week-old baby, and she needed help. The police then arrived at the Sanchez home in San Antonio, Texas, and the scene was so gruesome, so horrific, that law enforcement officials were vomiting, and they told the press afterwards that what they saw was something they will never be able to unsee. Audie, the mother of the baby, who in the past had been diagnosed with various mental health issues and had been diagnosed as a schizophrenic, had taken a knife and samurai swords and then beheaded her 3.5-week-old baby before proceeding to mutilate the corpse, and she then decided to eat portions of her baby's head, including parts of the child's brain. Audie later told the police that she was hearing voices and that the devil himself was telling her to kill her child, and that she couldn't do it anymore, and so she listened to his dark demands. This was a horrific crime that shocked Texas, and the baby's father later said he hopes Audie burns in hell for eternity. Now, as is seen in a lot of cases like this, people believe that Audie had postpartum depression, which sometimes can cause new mothers to murder their children or murder people they're close with. It's a really, really terrible thing that happens. But this case is just as shocking now as it was back in 2009 when this whole thing happened. There's also the fact that while this murder was occurring, Audie's sister and her 2 nieces were asleep in other rooms of the house. And the fact that afterwards Audie tried to take her own life but was unsuccessful. Audie has now been sentenced obviously to life in prison, but this event impacted so many lives, not only the family members and the people who loved that baby who were close to the family, but also the police officers. The police department had to offer counseling sessions to people who were there because of how dark and disturbing what they had to see was. If you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife Courtney. It's available on all streaming platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
There's a horrific murder case happening right now out of Milwaukee that everyone should be talking about. This is Sade Carlina Robinson. She was a 19-year-old college student who was just brutally murdered and dismembered by this man after meeting him for a first date. Her body parts are still being discovered around the state. She was murdered by 33-year-old Maxwell Anderson, and he's being described as the modern-day Jeffrey Dahmer. Upon searching his home, police found large amounts of blood on the walls leading into his basement, which was originally thought to belong to Sade, but DNA just confirmed that it doesn't, which now has people questioning whether or not he has more victims. This case began on April 1st when Sade met up with Maxwell for a first date at a seafood restaurant called Twisted Fisherman in Milwaukee. But when Sade failed to show up for work the next day, a friend reported her missing. And before an investigation could even begin, police made a grisly discovery. A severed leg was found in Mornemont Park, and DNA confirmed that it belonged to Sade. Authorities quickly found surveillance footage showing Sade and Maxwell at the restaurant eating at the same table, and it caught them leaving around 6:30 p.m. Investigators then used the Life 360 app to track where Sade's phone went that night, and they found that after leaving the restaurant, the two went to a bar and then to his home located near 39th in Oklahoma. Her phone was then traced to Mornemont Park between the hours of 2 and 3 a.m., where just hours later they would discover Sade's severed leg. The next morning, police found Sade's car, which had been burned, near 29th in Lisbon. And near the car, police also found her severed foot, which had pink nail polish matching the foot on the severed leg. Over the next few days, more of Sade's dismembered body parts were found in different areas around Milwaukee, most recently being her torso and arm, which had washed ashore on Lake Michigan. Maxwell was caught on security footage leaving the area of Sade's burned car, and he was also caught on video making multiple trips from her car to where some of her body parts were eventually found. He was then seen getting on a bus near where her car was found and going home the morning she was killed. This was enough evidence to arrest Maxwell during a traffic stop on April 4th. Inside the car, police found the clothing that he wore the same day that he burned Sade's car. This led authorities to search his home, which has been described as a house of horrors. Police found blood on a bed in one of his bedrooms, as well as blood covering the walls leading into his basement, which has now been described as a sex dungeon. They initially thought that this blood belonged to Sade, but after recent DNA testing, it was confirmed that this blood does not belong to her. At this point, police don't know who the blood belongs to, but it has many questioning whether or not Maxwell had more victims. Maxwell was arrested and has since been charged with first-degree intentional homicide, mutilating a corpse, and arson. He's pleaded not guilty to killing Sade and has asked for his case to be taken to trial. He is currently being held at the Milwaukee County Jail on a $5 million bond and is due to appear back in court on May 16th. Right now, there's no motive for why he did this. Maxwell does have a lengthy criminal history dating back to 2014, which includes domestic violence. But unfortunately, he was let off the hook, only to go on to commit this horrific crime. Right now, police are still looking for the rest of Sade's remains. Sade was about to turn 20 in May and was just about to graduate with her associate's degree in criminal justice. She dreamed of one day joining the US Air Force, but instead her life was so brutally taken from her. A GoFundMe has been set up for her family, so I'll include that here. Justice for Sade Robinson.
This love triangle murder case includes a yoga teacher, an unpaid Botox bill, a body in a pool of blood, and some panicked plastic surgery. Caitlin Armstrong loved yoga. In 2018, the 30-year-old flew to Bali to attend a yoga retreat. There, she gained a yoga qualification so that she could actually teach others. However, the retreat was far from idyllic. Others there noticed that Caitlin seemed a bit off. She was very overly dramatic and she wasn't really interested in getting to know anybody or make any friends. Although the group could tell that something wasn't quite right, they would have never guessed what happened next. Anna Wilson, nicknamed Mo, grew up in Vermont. Like Caitlin, she loved being active, but she was very interested in cycling. She worked really hard and became a professional. She was a really gifted woman and captivated anyone who met her. This included a man named Colin Strickland. He was also a cyclist, and the pair bonded over their love of the sport. They ended up dating, but Mo had no idea that Colin had a deadly ex-girlfriend. She happened to be none other than Caitlin Armstrong. Caitlin and Colin had been kind of on and off since 2019. They'd recently kind of broken up but were still in contact, and Caitlin definitely had not moved on. One evening in 2022, everything would change forever. It was the 11th of May, just before 10 p.m. Now, Mo had been staying with her friend's house in Texas, and her friend was confusingly also called Caitlin, but she was Caitlin with a C. She was staying there because of it being really convenient for a race she was going to be racing in. Mo had been to dinner that night with Colin. He had then dropped her back off at her friend's apartment. Caitlin with a C got a notification on her electronic door lock that Mo had unlocked the apartment door at 8:36 p.m. When Caitlin returned to the apartment, she was met with a scene like that out of a horror film. Mo was lying on the bathroom floor in a pool of her own blood. Police raced to the scene and determined that she had been shot 3 times. Authorities spoke with neighbours, and it turns out one neighbour had a Ring doorbell, and it actually captured a black Jeep driving away from the scene. Now, Mo's friend Caitlin told the police that Mo had been out with Colin that night, so the detectives decided to investigate. When they turned up at his house, they saw a black Jeep with a bike rack on, just like the one that had been seen on the Ring doorbell. Had Colin killed Mo after dropping her off? Colin stated to police that he'd only been seeing Mo in a professional, friendly manner, and he wasn't actually seeing her romantically. Detectives felt this was a little bit odd though, and they also found out that he had also been seeing Caitlin with a K. Then they typed the Jeep's details into their computer to see who it belonged to, and it belonged to Caitlin with a K. At her house, police also found 2 guns, one of which matched the shell casings found at the crime scene. They started asking people who knew Caitlin just about her and what she was kind of like, and somebody made a shocking revelation. They said Caitlin had told them that if anyone dated Colin, she would kill them, and when this was brushed off and laughed off as kind of a joke, Caitlin said, "No, you don't understand, I bought a gun." Colin also told police that Caitlin with a K was jealous and kept a close eye on what he was doing. It transpired that on the day in question, she had been following the pair. Now, police didn't actually have a warrant to go and arrest Caitlin, but they were able to bring her in for questioning due to a previous unpaid Botox bill that she was wanted for. She seemed very suspicious, and when police eventually got the paperwork to get the warrant to arrest her, they tried, and she'd already made a run for it. She'd sold her Jeep and fled to New York, where her sister lived, stole her sister's passport, and used it to flee to Costa Rica to evade capture. She then went as far as to have plastic surgery so that she didn't look the same if anybody came looking for her. She literally tried to begin a new life in the country, setting up a yoga business and dyeing her hair. However, police lured her in after putting out fake yoga teacher job adverts. She'd unknowingly walked right into their trap. They tracked her down, and one police officer posed as a tourist to finally arrest her after 43 days on the run. It transpired she'd killed her love rival in a jealous rage and used a fitness app to track down her movements prior. At her trial, she was found guilty of murder and given 90 years in prison.
So this man over here decided to transition into a woman so that he can avoid going to a man's prison. If for some reason you don't think this is messed up, I don't know what to tell you. In 2016 and 2019, a 31-year-old Adam Graham, who was first a man, attacked and AR'd 2 women. Adam claimed to have gender issues since the age of 4, but he only started transitioning in 2020 after he was charged. He changed his name from Adam to Isla, and now he's serving time in a woman's prison in Scotland. So you're telling me that a man who was charged and found guilty of the RAPE of 2 women was put in a facility filled with women? To me, it's just alarming how no one thought that this would be a safety concern for a woman, especially because of what he was charged with. Someone make it make sense.
One of the worst serial killers of all time is being released from prison. He goes by the name of the Serpent, and he's been linked to 20 murders of Western tourists all throughout Asia and the Middle East. Most of these attacks took place on the hippie trail, where he would lure in tourists by pretending to be a spiritual guru and then poison them. Some of his victims he would actually poison and then nurse back to health because he thought that it made them loyal to him. One time in 1976, he attempted to drug a group of 60 French students who were on holiday in New Delhi so that he could rob them. But he gave them too powerful of a dose and they all started passing out while standing up. Authorities caught on to this and he was arrested, where he was then linked to the murders of 20 other people. And he is currently being released from prison on good behavior and because of his old age. And we've seen this before with repeat killers where they just stop killing while they're in prison and then start killing the second they get out.
Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh boy.
You don't feel bad about it?
No.
The woman in this video, Cynthia Chedabaka, celebrated her 63rd birthday by murdering her son-in-law, Gioward Eustaquio. Coincidentally, it was also the day of her granddaughter's spelling bee, and when Cynthia got dressed, Gioward allegedly made comments about her appearance, saying she looked quote-unquote ghetto. Cynthia then proceeded to walk to her car, grab her revolver, go to the back patio, and shoot Gioward in the back 12 times, killing him instantly. With her son-in-law's body on the kitchen floor, Cynthia went on with her birthday celebrations, first going to a local cafe for breakfast, then to a casino, and finally to her favorite coffee shop, where she was brought into questioning by police. And what followed is an interrogation that would make anyone's blood curdle.
I think about this true crime case every year around the holidays. On Christmas Eve 1945, the Sauter family house burned down in West Virginia, and only 4 of the 9 children home that night made it out. The cops told the parents that all 5 children must have died in the fire that night, but when they did a search of the area the next day, no remains were found. Like, absolutely no evidence of the kids being in the house was found. So then fast forward a year, and the dad sees a photo in a magazine of a little girl in New York who looks identical to his daughter Betty. But then the authorities in town are like, "You're crazy, there's no way all the kids died in the fire that night." And then a little while after that, the authorities actually get in trouble for planting evidence in the rubble saying that the kids died in the fire. And then fast forward another 20 years, and the parents actually get a letter in the mail with this photo claiming to be their son Lewis, but are never able to find any more information about who this is. There's so many more twists and turns to this story, and I actually do a full breakdown in my most recent podcast episode. But if you know the case, what do you think? Did the kids really die in the fire that night? We need to talk about one of the worst accidents that ever happened on a horror film set, because I don't really see this moment talked about much. So this accident happened on the set of The Exorcist, which is already a movie that plenty of people think was cursed, hence why I did a whole episode about it. But in the movie, Linda Blair plays this little girl named Reagan who was possessed by a demon. And the way that the film shows you that she's possessed are by these contraptions that they built for her. This is one that makes her levitate, but there was also this one that made her thrash around. To use this device, Linda had to be sewn into a plank, that way her back was supported while it was thrashing around. And mind you, the people controlling this device were adult men, and Linda was a child. So during one take, Linda actually became untethered from this device, meaning that her back was no longer supported. And you can see it in this take, but watch as she starts crying after the director calls cut. That's because Linda had just broken her spine. The director and the other adults in the room all thought that she was acting up a storm when in fact her screams and cries were from her spine being fractured. Anyways, that's only one of the many wild things that happened on this set, so check out the episode for more.
Ever received a text from an unknown number that sent shivers down your spine? This happened to me, and it changed my life. But before we dive in, a challenge for you. If you want to know if you have a guardian angel watching over you, comment your birth year below and hit that follow button for more spine-chilling tales. My name's Alex. One evening, while relaxing at home, my phone buzzed. A text from Eisen Aoyuzu read, "Tomorrow, 3:15 p.m., avoid the oak tree." Thinking it was a prank, I brushed it off. But the next day, a gut feeling stopped me right before the oak tree on Elm Street. Moments later, a car crashed into it, right where I would have been. The mysterious texts continued. Don't drink the coffee tomorrow. The next day, news broke about a local cafe serving tainted coffee. Several were hospitalized. Who was sending these life-saving warnings? A guardian angel or a mysterious entity? Each message was a blessing in disguise, but why me? Stay tuned for the next part where I unravel this enigma. And remember, sometimes the unknown might be looking out for you.
This man faked his own death to avoid child R charges. 41-year-old Melvin MD was due to appear in court the day he conveniently went missing back in August. He had apparently been out kayaking and his son reported he'd gone overboard. It was believed that he may have drowned in the Mississippi River 30 miles west of New Orleans. However, he's recently been found alive and has been arrested. It was obviously an immediate red flag to police when they were investigating the missing person and found that he was actually due in court on R charges. These were charges of indecent liberties with a child and statutory R of a child. They obviously didn't publicly state their suspicions as they didn't want to tip him off. Investigators soon learned that due to him being out on bail, he was actually wearing an ankle tag. This allowed detectives to find out locations that the man had stopped at. On the 17th of September, a vehicle in Georgia was stopped that didn't have a number plate. The driver actually tried to flee and then crashed the car and was taken into custody. After giving a fake name, he was fingerprinted and it was revealed that he was the supposedly deceased man. Melvin is currently being held in jail awaiting trial.
Explaining the backstory to viral videos.
While this may appear to be a seemingly innocent video of a boy dragging a trash can with a dog barking at it, what may surprise you is that inside of that trash can is the body of the boy's high school math teacher, Colleen Ritzer. And on October 22nd, 2013, she asked one of her students, Philip Chisholm, to talk to her after class. Philip had recently moved from Tennessee, and when Colleen brought this up in conversation, Philip got extremely upset, so she changed the conversation immediately. At around 3 o'clock, Miss Ritzer got up to go use the restroom, and a few minutes later, Philip followed behind her. It was there that he pulled out a box cutter and slit her throat 16 times before raping her. Philip calmly walked out of the bathroom and returned about 10 minutes later wearing a new set of clothes and carrying a trash bin alongside him. Security cameras outside of the school show Philip rolling the bin with her body into the woods. At this point, Colleen is barely alive. Philip dumps her body onto the ground and shoves a tree branch inside of her. He leaves the scene with his teacher's credit card and uses it to buy Taco Bell and go and see a Woody Allen movie. Philip Chisholm was caught later that night and was sentenced to 40 years in prison.
Have you ever heard of the Sunderland Strangler? Stephen Greaveson is a lesser-known serial killer from Sunderland in the UK. He was active during the 1990s. Shockingly, he was known to lure young boys into abandoned buildings and kill them, and did so to 4 teenagers between 1990 and 94. In November 1993, he lured 18-year-old Thomas Kelly to an abandoned allotment shed. He killed him and then set him on fire. On the 4th of February the following year, he murdered 15-year-old David Hanson. Later that month, he would go on to lure 15-year-old David Grief to the same spot that he killed Thomas. Again, he killed him and set him on fire. All 3 boys attended Monk Wearmouth Academy. Now, Stephen was initially arrested in March and charged with attempted burglary at the house where he'd killed David Hanson. He was eventually charged in November 1995 with those 3 murders. He was given 35 years in prison. In November 2000, while in prison, he was arrested again. He was questioned over the 1990 murder of 14-year-old Simon Martin. Simon had been murdered in Gilside House in Roker. It took 12 years until he was eventually charged with this crime, and in 2013 he admitted being responsible. He was convicted of that murder in October 2013.
When 13-year-old Lucy McHugh threatened to out her abuser, she was silenced in the worst possible way. Stephen Nicholson, 25, had targeted Lucy after she developed a teenage crush on him. She was just a child and she was easy prey as he was actually a lodger in her house. He encouraged her to continue her interest in him and took full advantage, abusing her for a year. Lucy's school had actually reached out to social services twice to check on the living situation at Lucy's house, as Stephen had a previous conviction from when he was 14. He'd held children and staff at a children's home hostage at knife point. He was high on amphetamines and had actually held a knife to the throat of one of the female staff members. He'd been sent to a young offenders where he actually had another year added to his 2-year sentence after trying to stab a member of staff. In July 2018, Lucy had said to Stephen that she was going to come clean about the abuse, and Stephen decided that he had to stop her. Stephen lured Lucy to some woodland just outside Southampton Sports Centre in the early hours of July 26, 2018, and when he got there, he stabbed her repeatedly, 27 times in total, 3 of which were fatal stab wounds to her neck. He then attempted to burn the clothing that he was wearing, which was later recovered. On July 19, 2019, Stephen was found guilty for Lucy's murder and sentenced to a minimum of 33 years. He was also charged with 3 counts of rape, for which he received a further 17 years for each count. He's currently incarcerated at Wakefield Prison.
So this is John Tay Collier and Eric Dodds, a TikTok couple who amassed over 800,000 followers before they were arrested for murder charges. So before their